The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the faintest movement echoed against the cold marble walls. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of what everyone knew was coming. This wasn't an ordinary trial. It was a child abuse case, one of the most disturbing the state had ever seen. In the center of the room, perched on a high-backed chair, sat a little girl with golden brown hair and trembling hands. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her eyes were wide, not with curiosity, but with fear. She held tightly to the sleeve of her court-appointed child advocate, who sat beside her protectively. On her other side lay a golden retriever named Max, a trained comfort dog who had helped dozens of children face trauma inside the intimidating walls of the courthouse. He wore a blue vest with the words "Court Companion" stitched in yellow thread. His calm eyes followed her every move, loyal and unwavering. Everyone in the room could feel the tension radiating off the girl. The judge, a stern but compassionate woman named Judge Holloway, sat patiently at the bench. The attorneys, the court reporter, the jury all watched in silence. They had read the case file. They had seen the photos. But now the case depended on the smallest voice in the room. And that voice wasn't ready to speak. Instead of speaking, the girl lifted her right hand slowly toward Max. It was a soft, almost uncertain motion. Some thought she was reaching to pet him. Others assumed it was a nervous habit. But as her hand hovered just above her chest, she tapped herself once, then slowly made a circular motion in the air before resting her palm downward. Max's ears perked up instantly. His body shifted from relaxed to alert, his head turning sharply toward the back of the courtroom. The reaction was immediate and chilling. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply sat up tall, locked eyes with someone in the audience, and froze. The hairs along his back stood on end. The judge's eyebrows lifted in concern, clearly noticing the change in the dog's demeanor. "What was that?" Judge Holloway asked, directing her voice toward the advocate. "Is that ... a command?" The child advocate leaned in closer to the girl, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She turned toward the bench and spoke with a steady but serious tone. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "Max is trained to respond to emotional distress and to specific hand signals from victims who are too scared to speak. That signal she just used, it's not random. It's her way of saying she feels threatened, that someone dangerous is near." A collective ripple moved through the courtroom like a gust of wind. Whispered voices, shuffling papers. A juror placed a hand over their mouth. "Did she look at anyone in particular?" the judge asked. The advocate hesitated. "She pointed earlier ... toward the gallery, but we didn't know what it meant." All eyes turned toward the back of the room, where a man in a gray suit sat with a leather briefcase on his lap. He was an assistant to the defense attorney, someone no one had paid much attention to before. His eyes met the girl's as she immediately buried her face in Max's fur. "Bailiff," the judge said firmly, "please escort that man out of the courtroom for questioning." The room erupted in motion. The man stood quickly, but didn't resist. 2 officers moved in beside him. The girl clung tightly to Max. Her small shoulders trembled, but she stayed silent. As the man was led out, Max's eyes followed him the entire way. Judge Holloway looked down at the bench, her gavel resting silently by her hand. She didn't bang it. She didn't need to. The truth had already started to unfold, and it came from a child who hadn't said a single word. As the courtroom doors closed behind the detained man, the silence that remained felt heavier than before. Judge Holloway sat straighter in her seat, her expression unreadable but sharp. The girl hadn't spoken a word, but somehow she had said more than enough. Max, still sitting upright beside her, remained alert. His eyes were fixed on the door the man had exited through, his breathing slow, his posture tense. Everyone could feel that something deeper was unfolding. The judge turned toward the child advocate again. "Explain to the court what that signal means precisely," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the urgency in it. The advocate nodded, choosing her words carefully. "Your Honor, Max is part of a trauma support program for child witnesses. These children are often too frightened to speak about what happened to them, especially in public, or when facing their abuser. We train dogs like Max to recognize emotional shifts and to respond to specific hand cues from the child." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "And the one she used just now?" The advocate's voice grew soft. "That particular signal is taught as a code for fear. More specifically, immediate fear. We only teach it to children who might encounter someone they recognize as dangerous. It's not for general nervousness. It means she saw someone in this courtroom who she believes hurt her or played a part in her abuse." Gasps came from the gallery. One juror looked toward the girl with watery eyes. Max finally relaxed slightly, but didn't lie down. He remained on alert, his body language telling the court that something was still unresolved. The judge motioned to the bailiff. "Bring the assistant public defender forward. I want to know who that man was, and how he came to be present in my courtroom." A tall, flustered attorney stepped forward, clearly shaken. "Your Honor, that man's name is Alan Graves. He's a contracted legal clerk we've used for about a year. He's not an attorney, just handles paperwork and transcription. He's never interacted directly with clients." Judge Holloway's stare was unrelenting. "How well do you know him?" "Not well at all," the attorney admitted. "He's quiet, efficient. He came with great recommendations from another firm. I had no reason to suspect." "You do now," the judge interrupted, then turned to the court reporter. "Pause the trial for the day. This court is entering emergency recess pending a full inquiry." The gavel slammed down, not just for order, but with the weight of something deeper. Everyone stood as the judge exited, but eyes remained on the girl and Max. She hadn't moved since Graves left. Her hand now rested gently on Max's back, grounding herself. Slowly, she looked up at her advocate and whispered something inaudible. The advocate bent closer and nodded. "She wants to know if she's safe now," the woman told the officers nearby. One of them knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe now. We promise." Meanwhile, Graves was being held in a small interview room within the courthouse. Two detectives were already on their way to question him. When asked for identification, he hesitated. They found 2 driver's licenses in his wallet, one current, one expired, each with a different name. The red flags kept multiplying. Back in the courtroom, reporters began gathering outside. Someone had leaked a message about the unexpected recess and the strange signal from the child to the dog. Cameras started flashing through the courthouse windows. This was no longer just a local case. It was about to explode into something national. The child was escorted out through a private exit, her small hand never letting go of Max's fur. She hadn't spoken much. She hadn't needed to. Her truth was louder than words. And while no one could see the full picture yet, one thing was suddenly clear to everyone watching. This little girl knew something no one else did. And her dog, Faithful, silent and brave, was the only one who had heard her speak. Alan Graves sat in the small interview room, his hands clasped tightly on the metal table in front of him. The soft hum of the overhead lights filled the silence, but it couldn't drown out the growing tension. His expression was neutral too. Neutral. He barely blinked as the 2 detectives entered with a folder in hand. One of them placed it on the table, opened it, and slid out 2 photos. "We want to know why this little girl identified you," one detective asked, his tone calm, but firm. Graves didn't answer. He kept his gaze low, lips sealed. The detective continued, We also want to know why you're carrying identification under two different names. One matches your recent employment here. The other, well, that one tells a different story. Still, Graves said nothing, but the file spoke volumes. His real name was not Alan Graves. It was David Kent, an alias he had abandoned 5 years ago after a disturbing abuse case in another state. That case had been dropped due to a lack of conclusive evidence and a frightened, uncooperative witness. But the details were eerily similar. A child, a frightened silence, and a man who vanished when pressure came. David Kent, alias Alan Graves, was once again at the center of something dark. Back in the courthouse, Judge Holloway reviewed the new information with prosecutors and investigators. Her fingers tapped anxiously against the bench. How was this man allowed to operate under a false identity in the state's legal system? She asked. He had access to dozens of cases involving minors. The room fell quiet. It wasn't just one background check that had failed. It was a series of oversights, loopholes, and outdated procedures. No one had thought to run a national fingerprint match when Graves was hired as a clerk. His record had been clean because he had legally changed his name in a state that didn't link name change history to prior court files. He slipped through, one investigator admitted. And if the girl hadn't signaled Max, he may have kept slipping through. Meanwhile, the child, safely housed in a protected witness suite, played quietly with Max. Her fingers curled into his fur as she hummed a lullaby softly to herself. She hadn't spoken much, but her eyes seemed calmer. Now, the presence of Max comforted her more than any words from adults. The child advocate sat across from her, preparing for the next steps. We need to ask her more, the psychologist said quietly, but only if she's ready. The advocate nodded. She's already done more than anyone expected. The girl looked up, as if she knew they were speaking about her. Max helped, she said softly. Her voice was small, but clear. He remembered him, too. The adults glanced at each other. Remembered him? The advocate asked gently. The girl nodded. The man was at my house before. He brought my mom papers. He looked at me funny. Max barked at him that day. He never forgot. That one sentence pierced the air like lightning. Max had recognized him. Not just as a threat in general, but specifically. It made sense. Therapy dogs form emotional memories. And Max had been with the girl during her early recovery. He'd likely been present the day that strange man visited her home. Suddenly, the courtroom's earlier events took on even more weight. This wasn't just a child's fear. It was recognition on two levels. Human and canine. The judge received the update immediately. She closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered, "It's not just a signal anymore. It's a testimony." And just like that, the direction of the case shifted. Graves was no longer a silent clerk in the corner. He was a central figure in what appeared to be a network of concealed abuse. The girl's hand signal had started something that was now unstoppable. And the golden retriever beside her gentle, loyal Max had just become the most unexpected witness of all. The next morning, the courtroom looked different. The usual formal atmosphere was still there. The robes, the solemn faces, the echoing footsteps, but beneath it all pulsed a new kind of tension. Something had shifted. The case was no longer just about the girl's testimony. It was now about uncovering a deeper web of truth. The little girl returned, walking cautiously beside Max, her hand gently clutching the dog's leash. Her advocate whispered soft encouragements as they approached the witness stand. Judge Holloway gave her a warm, reassuring nod. "You're doing so well," she said. "Only speak when you feel ready. There's no rush." The girl sat in the chair again, this time with Max's head resting on her knee. She didn't look at the jury or at the crowd. Her eyes remained low, her fingers absently scratching behind Max's ear. Then she spoke quietly at first, almost to herself. "He came to the house one time. I was in the kitchen. Mommy told me to go to my room." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Do you remember what he looked like?" She nodded slowly. "He wore glasses then. But he had the same shoes, the same gray shoes." Behind her, the officers flipped through surveillance photos taken from the courthouse lobby. In one of them, Alan Graves, formerly David Kent, was captured wearing gray dress shoes. The same kind she had described. "Did he say anything to you?" the prosecutor asked. The girl hesitated, then looked at Max, as if waiting for his permission. Then she spoke. He smiled, but not nice. Max barked. Mommy got mad at Max. She put him outside. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor let the silence linger before asking gently, "Do you remember what he did next?" The girl's eyes welled with tears. She didn't speak. She reached down, placed both hands on Max's shoulders, and leaned into him. Her breathing grew uneven. The judge raised her hand. "We'll take a short recess," she said immediately. "Let the child rest." The girl was gently led away to the adjoining comfort room, Max walking beside her in perfect sync. As the door closed behind them, the courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs. The image of that small girl, bravely recalling a traumatic memory in front of strangers, had touched everyone in the room. In the judge's chambers, a new update was delivered by the lead detective. "Your Honor, we found something else," he said, holding up a flash drive inside an evidence bag, recovered from Graves's apartment. Encrypted, but the forensic team cracked it. He inserted it into the laptop and opened a folder. Inside were dozens of hidden files, some labeled by initials, others by addresses. But one folder caught everyone's attention. It had the name of the little girl's mother. Inside this folder are documents, handwritten notes, photos, and scanned letters. Some of it appears to be communication between Graves and the girl's mother. Talks about keeping quiet and legal favors. Judge Holloway closed the laptop with a heavy sigh. So the mother knew. "Yes, ma'am," the detective replied, or was being manipulated. Either way, she's now part of the investigation. What had begun as a single child's silent warning had now exposed layers of deceit, manipulation, and exploitation. But despite all that darkness, the light had come from the smallest voice in the room, a child too scared to speak out loud, but strong enough to raise her hand in fear. Max waited quietly outside the comfort room while the girl rested. He lay at her feet when she napped, alert when she stirred. He didn't need words to understand what she felt. He remembered that man, just like she did, and now, both of them were finally being heard. The case had taken a new direction, and the courtroom was bracing for what would come next, because for the first time, the child's memory was speaking, and it was no longer afraid. What began with a trembling hand and a dog's alert posture had now spiraled into something vast and horrifying. The flash drive recovered from Alan Graves' apartment became a key that unlocked an entire web of secrets. Over the next few days, investigators uncovered that Graves hadn't just changed his identity. He had carefully embedded himself within the legal system, where he could stay close to vulnerable children. The files revealed his connections to over a dozen therapy centers and children's shelters across multiple states. In some, he had volunteered. In others, he had posed as legal support or even donated anonymously, earning trust and access. What was most chilling wasn't just his actions. It was how many times the system had unknowingly let him in. Judge Holloway read each new report with growing disbelief. How did no one see this? She whispered in her chambers, stacks of documents. In front of her, but in the middle of the storm stood the girl, small, quiet, but suddenly the most important voice in the country. Outside the courtroom, news vans now crowded the street. The press had caught wind of the story. A little girl, too scared to speak, had exposed a predator using a hand signal to her therapy dog. Overnight, headlines exploded. Child silence signal uncovers hidden threat in court. Comfort. Dog helps child reveal predator in legal system. Bravery without words. A dog, a girl, and a nationwide wake-up call. The girl, shielded from the cameras, remained under high protection. Her testimony had become the foundation of something bigger than any single case. More victims, both children and adults, began calling in. One by one, people who had crossed paths with Graves came forward, describing moments they had dismissed as creepy, suspicious, or strange. But none had spoken out until now. The prosecutor, once skeptical about building a strong case without verbal testimony, now had everything he needed. Physical evidence, patterns of movement, encrypted communication, and most of all, the recognition by both the child and the dog. It was unprecedented, but legally admissible under special trauma witness guidelines. Back in the Child Advocacy Center, the little girl played with blocks, while Max sat beside her. She looked different, now still quiet, still cautious, but there was a peace growing inside her. Safety was no longer a maybe. It was real. The psychologist observed her closely. She doesn't flinch anymore when doors close, she noted to the advocate. She's rebuilding. Later that day, the girl was asked one more question. Would you like to speak to the judge one last time? She hesitated, then nodded. In a private room, set up to look warm and comforting, Judge Holloway sat across from her, without a robe or gavel. Just two people and a dog in the room. You helped stop something terrible, the judge told her. Not many adults could do what you did. But you told the truth, even without using words. The girl looked at Max, smiled faintly, and said, "He helped me be brave." The judge reached out and touched Max's head. "He's a good boy. But you were the one who raised your hand." That moment changed everything. Outside, new warrants were being signed. More names were being investigated. Policy discussions were already underway about expanding the use of therapy. Animals in courtrooms across the country. The world was reacting, and at the heart of it all was a child who had once been invisible. Her voice had been buried in fear, silence, and pain. But now, her truth was louder than anyone's, because sometimes the smallest signals carry the greatest weight. And one brave little girl had just taught the nation how to listen. The investigation widened at a rapid pace. Federal authorities now joined the case, confirming what local prosecutors had feared. Alan Graves, formerly David Kent, had moved from state to state, always around children, always under a new identity. He wasn't just a one-time offender. He was a predator hiding behind paperwork, legality, and silence. Judge Holloway took the unusual step of requesting an emergency judicial review of all cases Graves had access to during his employment. She ordered a task force to contact every child from those files. Some were already adults. Others were still in the system. The fear was clear. How many children had he harmed, while the world remained unaware? But amidst the chaos, something remarkable was happening. The little girl, once so frightened she could barely lift her head, was changing. Each day, as the investigation progressed, she seemed to grow a little taller, not in inches, but in spirit. Her therapy continued, always, with Max beside her. And slowly, she began speaking without fear. In one of her sessions, she looked at her therapist and said, "If Max knew he was bad, then I knew I wasn't wrong. I used to think I was lying in my head, but Max never lies." Those words moved the therapist to tears. Meanwhile, courtroom protocol across the country began to shift. Other courts called Judge Holloway, asking how they could implement therapy animal programs. Advocacy centers were flooded with calls from officials asking how to help more children speak out safely. What happened in one courtroom with one child and one dog was now creating real, tangible change. The judge prepared for the upcoming formal trial against Graves. It would no longer be handled in quiet hearings. With the evidence mounting and public interest at an all-time high, it was now a high-profile federal trial. And while the girl's testimony had already been documented and sealed, she asked one day very quietly if she could say something live. Judge Holloway was surprised. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. The girl nodded. "I want him to know. I remember, and I want other kids to see me say it. I don't want to hide anymore." They arranged a special closed courtroom, where her live statement would be streamed privately to the press and courtroom participants. Max, of course, would be beside her, the day of the hearing. The courtroom was silent again, just as it had been in the beginning. The girl walked in slowly, holding Max's leash. She climbed the witness stand, her feet barely reaching the footrest. She looked across the room, not at Graves, but at the camera. "I'm not scared now," she said simply, "because I know what he did was wrong. I know Max knew it, and I know I didn't make it up. If someone ever hurts you, you can tell someone even if you can't use words right away. Dogs understand, and good people listen." She turned and hugged Max, burying her face in his fur. The judge sat frozen for a moment before quietly saying, "Let the record show. This child has shown the purest form of courage this court has ever seen." Graves didn't look up once during her statement. Outside, a crowd watched the statement from screens. Some cried. Some clapped. All were changed. The bravery of a little girl and the unwavering instinct of a dog had pulled truth from shadows into the light. This wasn't just a victory in a courtroom. It was the beginning of a justice movement. The girl stepped down from the stand. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because justice was no longer sleeping. It had awakened. Months passed since that unforgettable testimony, and the courtroom that once held its breath had returned to its usual rhythm. But the people inside it had changed. Judge Holloway often found herself pausing between cases, her thoughts drifting back to the little girl with the soft voice and the brave heart. No one who had witnessed that moment could forget it. The trial against Alan Graves proceeded with overwhelming evidence. Victim after victim came forward. Testimonies poured in, many supported by reopened files and statements from children who had once been too scared to speak. Now, encouraged by one girl's courage, they were no longer silent. But while justice moved swiftly, healing had its own pace. The girl, now living with a warm, stable foster family, was thriving in ways no one had predicted. Her foster mother, Alyssa, was patient and kind, and treated her not like a fragile case, but like a real child. She gave her space to talk, to play, and to simply be. Every week, the girl visited Max. The first visit was emotional. Max had since been retired from courtroom duty, his handler deciding he deserved peace after such intense service. But the dog's reaction the moment he saw the girl again brought tears to everyone nearby. He wagged his tail wildly, barked once, and ran to her, pressing his head into her chest as she laughed and hugged him tightly. They walked together through the park that day. The girl wore her favorite yellow jacket, Max by her side on a blue leash. For the first time in a long while, she smiled without looking over her shoulder. Her therapist observed her growth. "She's not just recovering," she told the foster mom. "She's inspiring. She wants to help other kids. That's rare and beautiful." At school, the girl started drawing again. This time, her pictures were different. No shadows. Number. Fear. She drew dogs helping children in courtrooms. Judges smiling. Kids holding up signs that said, "I'm not afraid." Her teacher placed one of them on the bulletin board with a gold star. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway launched an initiative. In her district, every child abuse case would now include the option of a therapy animal. Funding was granted, training expanded. Within months, dozens of new dogs were placed with courthouses, shelters, and hospitals. The movement spread beyond the state. Inspired by the girl's story, several senators pushed legislation requiring improved background checks for all courthouse employees, especially those with access to minors. Graves's loophole could no longer be used again. The girl's story was shared at national conferences, but her identity was kept private. She was referred to only as the witness who raised her hand. Her story sparked reform and hope. One evening, as the sun set over the hills behind her foster home, she sat on the porch with Max beside her. She held a notepad in her lap and wrote something quietly. Her foster mother stepped outside with hot cocoa. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" The girl smiled shyly and handed her the paper. At the top it said, "How dogs help kids like me." It was a story she wanted to turn into a book, something other children could read when they were scared. Melissa hugged her tightly. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "You're helping more people than you know." The girl looked at Max and said, "He helped me first. Now I want to help someone else." It wasn't just healing. It was purpose. And it had only just begun. 3 years later, the courtroom that once held a little girl and a silent dog was now famous for more than just justice. It had become a symbol of change. The girl, now 10 years old, stood on the stage of a national child advocacy conference in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with judges, therapists, social workers, and lawmakers. Her speech was pre-written and rehearsed, but the strength in her voice was real, natural, and full of quiet power. "I was once too scared to speak. I didn't know how to tell the truth because it hurt too much. But Max showed me that truth doesn't have to be loud to be strong." Behind her, a large screen displayed illustrations from her upcoming children's book, How Dogs Help Kids Like Me. It was set to be published next spring. The first print was already sold out. In pre-orders. Max sat beside her as always, a little older now, his face dusted with gray around the muzzle, but his eyes still sharp and proud. The audience gave them a standing ovation. Judge Holloway was in the front row, wiping tears from her glasses. She had followed the girl's journey since the first day in court and never missed a single milestone. After the speech, she walked backstage, knelt down, and took the girl's hand. "You've changed more lives than most people do in a lifetime," she said. "And you're just getting started." The girl smiled and patted Max's head. "He's the real hero." Max wagged his tail slowly, leaning into her side. Later that night, the girl and her foster family walked past the courthouse where it had all started. A new bronze statue had just been installed there, a tribute to courthouse therapy dogs. It showed a dog sitting calmly beside a child in a witness chair. Below the sculpture, a plaque read, "To the silent guardians who help children find their voice." Inspired by the first courtroom hero, Max, the girl stared at quietly, then took a picture with her phone. "I want to come back here someday," she whispered, "not because I have to, but because I choose to." Melissa, her foster mother, hugged her. "You can be anything you want now. You already proved that." That same week, Alan Graves was officially sentenced to life in federal prison without parole. More than a dozen victims gave statements, but the loudest message came from the system itself. This time, it had listened. This time, it had protected. Child advocacy centers across the country adopted the Max Protocol, a formal structure for integrating therapy dogs into courtrooms, hospitals, and school interviews. The program was funded in every state, but the biggest shift wasn't in policy. It was in children. More kids began to speak. More whispered truths became voices. The fear that once silenced them was now being replaced by the quiet power of empathy. By dogs like Max and girls like the one who raised her hand. One evening, the girl sat in her room with Max asleep on her feet and her sketch pad open. She drew a picture of herself on that first day in court, tiny, afraid, hand raised. Then beside it, she drew herself now smiling, standing tall, with Max next to her again. Above both drawings, she wrote, "I used to be scared, but now I speak for others." She pinned it on her wall next to her growing collection of awards, letters from children she'd helped, and photos of other therapy dogs now working in courthouses around the country. Justice hadn't just been served. It had grown because of one girl, one dog, and one silent signal in a courtroom that changed the world.